Hey everyone, quick video on just some thoughts on the CHIPS Act, and just even a little bit more broadly, just some thoughts on the need, the intense and severe and pressing need for the U.S. to bring back chip manufacturing and the manufacturing of generally the manufacturing of critical supplies and components, specifically technological supplies and components, but this applies to other realms as well, like medical components and supplies, things like that as well. So we need to bring it back in the U.S. The way I think of it is like this: we after the fall of the Soviet Union, the world benefited in a way by having everyone kind of interconnect, and so every entity, every company, every city, every state, really every entity in the economy did not have to be as robust, or did not have to plan as much, did not have to have as much insurance and reserves, and didn't have to kind of have a just in case approach. Instead, they could have a just in time approach, right? Just in time. I heard this somewhere. This is not my own. The just in case versus just in time. That's not my own thing. So just in time, and this guy was saying, "Oh, we're now moving back to a just in case approach," but the world wasn't a just in case approach before the '90s. Before the '90s, people knew about the concept of resiliency, of robustness, of having inventories, of having capacity, excess capacity, not always operating right at the line of capacity. They understood the idea of having various implicit forms of insurance built into their processes and approaches. In the past, the idea that all of your critical components are produced by somebody who is your rival, even somebody that's your ally. If you're not self-sustaining for a country like the U.S., that deeply limits us. That deeply has the potential to inhibit us and frustrate our future endeavors. Not yet, but potentially in the future, our endeavors, our desires, our actions can be impeded and frustrated. And that's a negative thing, especially if we're getting close to rivalry. Another way to put it is there's a inherent wrong way risk. Wrong way risk. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Probably not. But this is a term in finance and options. There's a type of risk. It's called wrong way risk. It's real and it exists. And financial institutions and sophisticated financiers, sophisticated business people, sophisticated people in finance generally, they try to understand that risk and mitigate it if they're exposed to it. The concept of wrong way risk is that whenever my exposure, and wrong way risk, it's always to do with a third party. So it's a type of a third party risk in a sense, right? Out of all the types of risk, credit risk, market risk, operational risk, there's tons of risks in the world in your financial portfolio. There's the risk that prices will go down. There's the risk that you'll fuck up and do something wrong. If you're lending, which you're probably not if you're a small time investor, but if you're a bigger financial house and you're lending, there's obviously the credit risk aspect, which also is related to third party risk. So there's a specific type of third party risk called wrong way risk, where you basically, your exposure to that third party increases as that third party gets less and less solvent, less and less robust, less and less resilient, weaker and weaker. Your exposure to them increases. There's different ways that can happen. We're not going to go into that, but just imagine a scenario where like you, you know, you're interacting with another entity or person, and how much they owe you is correlated with how bad they're doing. So the better they do, they don't owe you that much. You're betting that they're not going to do well. You're betting that they're not going to do well, and they're the ones that are going to pay you. So the worse they do, the more they owe you. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? There's an inherent wrong way risk to it, because if the worse they do, the more they owe you, well, the worse they do, the less likely they are to pay you. So that's a negative thing that applies here as well, in a different sense, right? Not in the typical financial sense, but just in the normal like human sense, where if we're saying, oh, all our masks and chips come from a country far away, and when things are good with them, there's no risk. It's as things deteriorate, that's when the risk increases. So standing at a point in time, and gauging the relationship level and um, the current difficulty with getting items, that's not how you measure the risk here. That's not how you measure this risk. What you would what you would do is you would say, okay, tell me where we are now and give me the possibilities and attach probabilities to each possibility. So there's a 50% chance things will stay the same. There's a 20% chance things will get better. There's a 30% chance things will get worse. And then you could subdivide. We care about the worst, so let's talk about those 30. I'd say if you told me that, give me the 30. Now break that 30 down. So what percentage is it really bad? What percentage is it just medium bad? So maybe once you break that 30 down, it'll be 50. 50 that'll stay the same. 20 that'll improve, and then we've broken that 30 down. So maybe 10 that'll completely deteriorate to a very bad place. 10 that it'll deteriorate to like a medium place, and 10% that there'll be a war, heaven forbid. Um, so you can granularize those probabilities, and you could see, hey, if there's a war, probably they're not going to be sending us masks. If there's a war, probably they're not going to be sending us chips, right? Come on, let's not be dumb. Let's not be foolish and naive. So there's a 10% chance we'll end up in a very bad situation. A very bad situation. But um, it, it's a little more complex than that. But that's the gist of it. We could do things about it. We can easily do things about it. And I think we are, which is quite impressive and quite astounding to me. Growing up in the 90s, coming of age in the early 2000s, I've only seen an inept Congress. I've only seen a useless, lazy, pathetic almost Congress. A Congress that just panders to their constituents, panders to their donors, and doesn't care about the common interests of the American people. A Congress that just is made up of people that seem weak and uninterested in rebuilding American civilization again, as every generation has to do. It seems like they weren't interested in it. I'm not sure if they're interested in it now, but at least the media, the government bureaucrats, really a lot of power with those two. Also, the other interests in the U.S., like corporations and the donor class, and then the hidden elites, some other bureaucracies in D.C. They're all coming together, and we're all kind of realizing, also the military industrial complex, the elites, the corporate elites, the kind of the big players, everyone's realizing that, okay, yeah, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it made sense for me to focus on myself and my particular industry or my particular thing, right? But once the overall power of the U.S. is now at risk, once the U.S. hegemony and preeminence is at risk, well, that's a different story. An elite in the U.S. would want to have the dollar maintain its value. They'd want the U.S. to maintain absolute military like control over the globe, and they just generally would want a stable economy, the kind of economy that incredible U.S. security has been able to provide in the form of naval security, naval trade routes, where up until Russia invaded Ukraine, free trade. By free trade in the sense, I'm not talking about tariffs here, but I'm talking about free trade in the sense that um, you had freedom of movement and navigation on the seas without like worry that there's gonna be a pirate or something. But so these things are aligning now. These groups are aligning with each other now, and they're basically making the right decisions finally, in some sense. No longer are we seeing these groups separate, and so Congress is allowed, in a sense, or uh, empowered to act and make these actions. Pretty good.